Welcome everyone. I want to start by thanking you all for your interest and taking the time to attend this webinar. My name is Amro Eid, and I'm the Director of Business Development at the FreeMind Group for the past 3 years now. And really, this webinar will serve as an introduction to the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases Omnibus New Broad Agency Announcement, which was released on January 18th. Now, of course, while we're not going to cover the full 128 pages of the solicitation, this should give you a pretty good understanding on the research areas of interest and the technical aspects that are expected from you, the applicants, when writing the proposal. Of course, along the presentation, if you have any questions, please write them down in the Q&A section. I'll try to go through as many as I can at the end if we have enough time. And also worth mentioning that we're going to make sure to share all the slide decks, and the BAA solicitation with you, as a reference. So a quick introduction about us, about FreeMind. Really for the past 2 decades, since 1999, our purpose has been to support life science entities in raising non-dilutive funding from both US federal agencies and private foundations. We have a pretty diverse client base. The vast majority of our clients are actually industry, from small to medium-sized startups to very few large pharma that we work with every year, and also academics, universities, independent research institutes, and others. We have about 85 full-time employees. On average, we submit about 750 grants per year, resulting in aggregate awards about $120 million that we raise on behalf of clients annually. In fact, we have just passed the $1.7 billion mark this year over the past 23 years. So that's a great, great, great success. So we're going to start with the funding landscape in general. We have more than $60 billion available to fund all kinds of science related to human health. These sources of funding include of course, from the Department of Human and Health Services, we have the NIH, more than 27 institutes and centers. We also have BARDA, the Biomedical Advanced Research Development Agency, the FDA, the CDC, the National Science Foundation, or the NSF, the Department of Defense, of course, including the US Army, DARPA, or the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, excuse me, DETRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, CDMRPs, the congressionally directed medical research programs from the DoD, and many, many others, in addition to private foundations like Bill and Melinda Gates, Michael J. Fox, JDRF, and many, many others. As for what do these funding sources support, they really cover the entire R&D process from proof of concept, discovery, all the way to clinical trials. As you can see, there are different mechanisms that fund, have different levels of funding for different stages of development. So for early stage projects, one can expect between $200 to $500,000. For more advanced preclinical, just before phase 1 or including phase 1, between $500 to $3 million, and phase 2 and 3 can be much, much more. So moving on to the most famous and largest agency, the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. Out of the $60 billion funding landscape that we have just mentioned, about $52 billion, the vast majority comes from the NIH. Now, what is spent outside the NIH is actually 43 billion, not 52, and they call it as extramural research. So, funding that leaves the NIH to fund top science really everywhere in the world. So for those who are not so familiar with NIH, as I mentioned, 27 institutes and centers, they really fund all types of science related to human health. The focus, of course, for this presentation is going to be on the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases. So looking at the NIH categorical spending, we can see that it really covers any illness known to mankind. So we can see here, actually where the government is spending its money. It is important to note, though, that though these categories are not mutually exclusive, there's a lot of overlap. So, for example, we can see, neurosciences, brain disorders, and neurodegenerative diseases, or you can see HIV, AIDS, infectious diseases. There are various categories here, so there's a lot of overlap, and funding is available to all types of projects to deal with human health. Overall, for infectious diseases, it's about $8 billion. So for the sake of this webinar, of course, we're going to focus on the NIAID Institute, and more specifically on the new BAA that was just announced a couple of weeks ago. So first of all, who's NIAID? It's one of the largest institutes at the NIH. It really conducts and supports basic and applied research to better understand, treat, and ultimately prevent infectious, immunologic, and allergic diseases. Um, Looking at the budget, so for the year 2022, this year, the budget request is about $6.3 billion, about $200 million increase from last year, or about 3%, which is a lot. When we look at the key research areas, it's mainly emerging public health threats, including emerging and re-emerging infectious diseases such as COVID, of course, and the flu, HIV, AIDS, biodefense, immune mediated diseases, including asthma, allergy, and many, many others. So diving deeper into the actual BAA that we have just received, it includes 4 distinct research areas, each with a specified closing date and time. So the research area number 1 is vaccines, vaccine candidates for biodefense, AMR, antimicrobial resistant infections, and emerging infectious diseases. The second area is the therapeutic candidates. The third one is antiviral programs for pandemics, the development of antivirals for specific RNA viral families and pandemic potential. And the fourth research area is in vitro diagnostics. As you can see here, research areas 1, 2, and 4 have the same deadline, which is next month on April 18th. In a couple of months on April 18th. The antiviral program, research area 3, is on March 18th, which is next month. So under this BAA, the contract funding will support vaccine and therapeutic development through candidate testing, various stages of development, manufacturing, preclinical or non-clinical toxic studies, early clinical studies, including phase 1 and 2, and even beyond. When it comes to diagnostics, it can be most critically supported in the planning, the design, development, and verification phases of the product development. So under this BAA, we have about $47 million available to fund different stages of development and even beyond phase 2 and manufacturing. So it really enables the projects to transition to other funding to support advanced clinical development. So really, it doesn't matter what kind of stage of development you're at, there's funding available. In terms of the total duration period, so for all research areas, the total duration of the proposed contract, and I know this makes a lot of sense, but it should be consistent with the nature and the complexity of the applicant's proposed research, and it may vary depending on the scope of the project, technical objectives, and other elements. But in all cases, it shall not exceed 5 years. So when we talk about funding for research areas 1, 2, and 4, which are, once again, vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, it's a total of $12.8 million for the award of 5 to 6 contracts. The deadlines are in April. The anticipated award date are going to be in May 2023, or May next year. When it comes to funding for area number 3, which is the antiviral program for pandemics, There's about $34 million available for the award of at least two or more type of contracts. The deadline is next month, as I mentioned, and the award date is going to be in November next year. Keep in mind that for all research areas, the number of awarded contracts will ultimately depend on the number of technically, the top science proposals, their importance to the agency programs, the availability of the funds. Now, of course, make no mistake, it is going to be very, very competitive, but there is, really significant awards are possible here. Okay, so let's dive deeper into research area number one, which is the development of vaccine candidates for biodefense, antimicrobial resistant infections, and emerging infectious diseases. So here we have two main priorities when we speak about vaccines. The first one is, vaccines, the classical, vaccine areas of focus and priorities, ABC pathogens. Please check the solicitation for the complete list of various pathogens of interest. The second area, well, the second priority, of course, in no particular order, is vaccines for AMR or antimicrobial resistant organisms, including biodefense, gram-negative, gram-positive bacterial and fungal pathogens. Of course, in terms of the objective, the research areas is focused on the advancement of a promising lead vaccine candidate from preclinical testing through evaluation. In a clinical trial, it covers different stages of development, of course. In the solicitation, they do have a list of different items that they will not support, and I'll explain. This include basic research, the selection of antigen or platform and a discovery of a new candidate. So when we say basic research is not supported, you basically need to have an antigen or immunogen design and technology platform selection completed, both well characterized. You should have preliminary data that demonstrates proof of concept in relevant animal models or model. It's preferred, but it's not a requirement to have evidence of a proof of concept efficacy data in a relevant animal model. Of course, there are more elements included in the solicitation. Other elements that are not supported in a vaccine research area are devices, diagnostics, or adjuvants in the absence of a companion product, therapeutics, specific vaccine candidates, including those two viruses, research involving the use of human fetal tissue, and more. So please read through the entire solicitation and seek expert help if you're not sure if it's a good fit or not. So moving on to the second research area, number two, the development of therapeutic products. Just like the previous area, the priorities are ABC pathogens and bacterial and fungal infections. Three main targets here: antimicrobial therapeutics, antiviral, and antitoxin. When it comes to the stage of development, from lead optimization, preclinical IND enabling studies, all the way to phases 1 and 2. The objective, of course, is to develop promising new therapeutics to address infections and diseases caused by those ABC priority pathogens and other selected bacterial and fungal pathogens. The research area will not support, once again, we kind of classified basic research and discovery of a new series. They will not support hit to lead optimization studies. Devices, of course, because it's a therapeutic research area. It will not support the development of probiotics and other microbiome related products. And of course, involving anything involves human fetal tissue is not supported, and more. For research area number three, which is the antiviral program for pandemics, or the APP, the proposals are highly encouraged for the development of broad spectrum small molecule or non-monoclonal antibody biotherapeutics, preferably for oral or intranasal dosing, with activity against one or more viruses of pandemic potential listed here. As you can see, it includes SARS, COVID, Ebola, Zika, West Nile, and others. The focus of this research area on the antiviral program as described in the actual solicitation, is the development of antivirals that directly block viral targets and function, and active against RNA viruses of pandemic potential, some examples we have just mentioned, and are new chemical entities, which include small molecules and small biotherapeutics, including, of course, some examples, nucleic acids, peptides, that are directly acting against viral targets and functions. They also have the need to have a suitable routes of administration. Examples are oral or intranasal, and safety profiles, of course. And this award area will not support monoclonal antibody development, basic research as always, hit to lead optimization and studies, devices, and others. Please read through the solicitation carefully to know exactly what is not supported. And moving to the final research area, number 4, the development of in vitro diagnostics. Of course, NIAID is interested and has always been interested in supporting the development of promising diagnostics technologies for biodefense, antimicrobial resistance, and emerging infectious diseases. For this BAA, it's going to be focused on 3 main areas. Number 1, in no particular order, of course. Number 1, next generation nucleic acid sequencing on portable systems. Number 2, rapid protein detection. Number 3, bacterial identification and phenotypic antimicrobial resistance characterization as well. Regarding the stage of development, as you can see here, the proposed program must have sufficient feasibility research completed and working in early through late stage development for a diagnostic test system that supports biodefense and emerging and re-emerging infectious pathogen preparedness. In terms of the research area, will not support pathogens that are not in the list, and they listed them in the BAA. So please go to the solicitation. We're going to also share it with you to see the exact list that they are interested in. Anything outside that list is not of interest. They're also not interested to support diagnostics that rely solely on the detection of host response antibodies, and also not willing to support platforms that require more than 5 minutes of manual steps to process the sample prior to loading it into the diagnostic. And there's more. So in this slide, we are going to dive a little bit deeper into the technical instructions of the proposals for research areas 1, 2, and 3, which are for vaccines, therapeutics, and antivirals. Only the diagnostics one is a bit different when it comes to the technical proposal instructions, but those 3 areas have the exact same instructions. Once again, this is for vaccines, therapeutics, and antivirals. So there are different elements that should be included for preparing proposals in response to those research areas, including the first step, as highlighted by the BAA, is the PDP, or the product development plan. So you need, the technical proposals, they have to describe the critical path to eventual licensure and identify the decision points, gates for progress. They should also detail the specific tasks and stages to be performed with contract funding that can be reasonably completed within the period of performance. And there are also more details that you really need to look at very carefully, but these are the 2 main points when it comes to the PDP, or the product development plan. As for the work plan, it must contain the specific tasks, the statement of work that includes, base and options, milestones, deliverables, and also you must have an associated Gantt chart must be included in the technical proposal, while the associated task linked budget shall be included in the business proposal. So once again, an associated Gantt chart has to be included in the technical proposal, while the associated task linked budget shall be included in the business proposal. And I'll explain when we reach to those stages, the technical and the business proposals. As for the clinical trial protocol development and implementation, if it's a clinical trial, of course, you must provide a protocol synopsis for each proposed clinical trial, including a brief description of, study objectives and endpoints, human subjects, protection, provisions for data monitoring and safety reports, draft inclusion, exclusion criteria, and recruitment, retention of study participants, and a summary of statistical approach. Other elements are also going to be reviewed, including regulatory compliance, quality control and assurance, data management, uniform cost assumptions, and post-award requirements. As for research area 4, which are the diagnostics, the in vitro diagnostics, as you may have noticed, there's no element on the clinical trial protocol development here because it's mainly, for diagnostics. But just like in other areas, you need to have a product development plan that provides a detailed information about the current development status of the diagnostic and outlines, the applicant's plans to advance the development of that diagnostic. And when it comes, of course, to the work plan, the same thing with the previous areas of research. You have to include the specific tasks, the statement of work, and also the associated Gantt chart. As for the uniform cost assumptions, which are also included in other areas of research, it's really about estimating costs and preparing the technical proposal. They do have a lot of examples and samples that they kindly provided in the BAA, so please have a look at those. You also have to include post-award, after the award, our contract initiation meeting. There's going to be an annual contract review meetings for each year of performance, monthly meetings to discuss progress, problems, proposed solutions, and any matter that is relevant to the scientific and financial administration of the project and future activities. Other elements are going to be reviewed include post-award requirements, reporting requirements, and deliverables. Once again, we try to cover as much as we can, but it's a 128 pages solicitation, so make sure that you read through everything very carefully. Okay, so when speaking about the proposal, it has to be prepared in two parts, the technical proposal and the business proposal. So each of the parts from those two proposals shall be separate and complete in itself, so that evaluation of one of them may be accomplished independently and concurrently with the evaluation of the other. In the technical proposal, there are 8 different sections as highlighted by the BAA. It's limited to only 150 pages. The technical proposal should disclose your technical approach in as much detail as possible. Some of those sections include the technical proposal overview, the statement of work format. As I've mentioned, samples are provided in the BAA. Technical discussion, the scientific and technical personnel, the project management, facilities, equipment, and more. So just make sure that you go over each of those 8 sections. Read very carefully on the instructions on each one of those sections and what should be included. Outline all your items and address them with vigor. As for the business proposal, you should propose a budget that is aligned with the statement of work as we have discussed. As such, of course, the business proposals must provide a detailed task-linked budget that consists of a breakdown of total costs to base on each option proposed, and it has to be associated with a detailed Gantt chart. The proposed budgets, they also should include an annual breakdown where annual budgets will be based on the total amount for all activities starting in that fiscal year. The business proposal must contain sufficient information to really allow the government to perform a basic analysis of the proposed cost or price of the work. This information shall include amounts of basic elements, proposed cost or price, including, as applicable, of course, direct labor, travel, materials, subcontracts, purchased parts, shipping, profit, indirect costs, etc. And this only covers a fraction of the information provided in the BAA. So please take your time and read through everything very carefully. So one quick tip before we finish up the presentation: use page 117 in the BAA, because on that page, you can find the evaluation criteria that is used by the peer review group when reviewing the technical proposals. The criteria are listed in the order of relative importance with weights assigned for evaluation purposes. So you can actually evaluate yourself internally using that checklist that is weighted prior submitting an application. That's awesome. As for final words of wisdom to conclude the presentation, just really make sure there is a good fit between the BAA requirements for each of those research areas and what you are proposing, and that you really have all the required items that they are looking, as part of their checklist and outlined in the solicitation. All the information is in the BAA. So read it carefully, and well, yes, take your time, but start now, because the deadlines, as I mentioned, are next month and in April. So you have to start right now. So that is it for today. I hope you all enjoyed the presentation and found it informative. Of course, if you are interested to have a discussion with us and explore how we might collaborate, please don't hesitate to contact me on my email address listed here, at amro@freemindconsultants.com. And just before we finish up quickly, let me check if we have any questions. Yep, this webinar is recorded, and it will be on YouTube. We will share with you the links as soon as it is uploaded. For area 2, how does the scope of what must be break compared to a phase 2 SBIR? Well, it is different because, as I mentioned, the applications are much more complex here. The technical proposal on its own can be up to 150 pages. That is much, much, much larger compared to your standard SBIRs. White paper submission, nope, it's not required. So the typical size, as I've mentioned, there's $34 million supposedly to award 2 to 3 contracts, and $13.8 million to award 5 to 6 contracts. So while they haven't specifically, they don't have a specific budget cap. Looking at the numbers, people can actually get awards up to probably $14 million. So really depending on the competition, the quality of the science that is proposed. But the total budget is about $48 million. $48 million is going to only be allocated to few companies that will be funded next year. All right, I think it's about time. We've just finished the time for this webinar, and thank you all for your questions and for attending. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you. Thanks a lot. And if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to me directly at my email address, at amro@freemindconsultants.com. And I'll be more than happy to address any specific questions and even jump on a call to discuss further. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day.